below, I have a lot of disclaimers to bring the people. So, for this episode, Kate and I talk about fanfiction. We briefly touch on NSFW topics. We don't super go into them. There's also spoilers for 3 fanfics: House of Cards by Sugarmans, Ukiyo by Charlena, and A Songbird and the Sea by Maya Archives. So if you want to avoid those, they're towards the end of the podcast. You'll know when we're starting to talk about them. You can skip over that section. We don't super go into them, but we do touch on some plot points from those fanfics if you're planning on reading them. So within this episode, we talk about fanfiction. Fanfiction is a nuanced topic. Kate and I are no means complete experts in fanfiction. Fanfiction is a very large and diverse field of study that we know from our own perspectives. Kate from her experience in ARMY and doing fiction writing, me and my experience in ARMY and also many other fandoms and the spaces that I have been in. Additionally, we talk at length about how all of the BTS members are interpreted within fanfiction. There are some uncomfortable bits, especially around Jimin and the feminization of Asian men. So we did briefly talk about that during a queer episode. We kind of go into it more during this episode, so just be aware. I am also congested. I am sorry if that sucks to listen to. We're struggling, but I'm doing okay. I'm just congested because I have cat allergies and I live with a cat. It's just a choice. Okay, that's it. But other than that, thank you all so much for coming to listen to our episode, and please enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Podcast by ARMY podcast, where we talk about BTS, ARMY, fandom, and research. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Kate Ringland and
Jhertau Her, a university researcher.
And today we're talking about fan fiction. Finally.
Fan fiction. Fanfiction. That's all I got. Hey, that's the whole episode. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good day. Bye. I'm just kidding. But yeah, fanfic is pretty cool. It's one of my favorite things. I read it every day, which is wild because I don't have the time to read it every day.
That's when you know it's important. That's when you know it's important, when you have so much going on in your life and it's still something you do every day.
Yeah.
Like drinking water, reading fanfic.
Exactly. Hey, how'd you get into fanfiction?
I became an ARMY and discovered a whole world of fanfiction, which is interesting because I've been deep in fiction writing and kind of playful storytelling spaces forever, my whole life. I was just saying, I think the first time I played Dungeons and Dragons was when I was like 9. My cousins sat us all down and helped us create characters. And yeah, so I've been actively telling stories and reading stories and just steeped in fictional literature for a long time. I just didn't realize there were whole spaces on the internet where I could share my writing with other people and read other people's writing. I'd only been doing it with close friends and family. So anyway, so then I discover, as I'm getting enculturated into ARMY spaces, I'm discovering a whole new world of fan fiction. So I've been reading BTS fanfics since 2020 now, which is, now that I'm thinking about it, is 4 years of reading fan fiction. So that actually is quite a lot. I could not even tell you how many hundreds of thousands of millions of words of BTS fanfic I've read now. Because yeah, I read it every day and am an active writer on AO3. So there's that. I'm not going to tell you who I am because that's the one thing in my life that I keep under lock and key. I'm very bad at this. But anyways, but I do write it and read a whole lot. I have a whole database of my favorite fics that I keep for myself. So that's my background. Over to you.
This is going to take a while. Make it as short as possible. I have been reading and writing fanfiction since 2013. I was a kid in elementary school. I would literally carry books with me and read them as I was walking.
Mm-hmm.
I literally would just read all the time. So I read a lot as a kid, and then I translated to fanfiction, obviously. And then I wrote fanfiction too. Like immediately when I got into fandom, I started writing fanfiction. And that just became one of the big bases for me with my fandom participation is writing fanfiction. And I love writing fiction. I think it's great. I think over the years, I've gotten better at writing. Thank God. Oh my God. And I very much come from like a fanfic author background. I don't really see fanfiction from like the reader perspective. Because like even when I'm reading other people's fanfics, I'm just like, oh, I see why they did that from an author point of view.
Mhm.
So that's my perspective. Been doing this for a long time. I'm really tired. Sometimes like writing fanfic is really hard, especially with like how the culture changes. Like things are so different now. But at least
Mhm.
we have it BTS and we have BTS fanfiction. Yay.
And there's so much of it. There's so much BTS fanfiction.
There is so much. It's one of the top fandoms on AO3. I think if we include like fanfiction outside of AO3 as well, and also like Twitter threads, obviously, and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
if you start counting all the fanfiction, it's prolific, shall we say.
And it's a lot. There's a lot of fanfiction. And all that fanfic really are reflections of how the fandom views the BTS members versus like how the BTS members actually are as people and celebrities. It's very interesting to see like the differences between each thing. Like you were thinking about this earlier, Kate. Do you want to talk about this? Namjoon and Yoongi?
It's interesting, kind of. This is something that's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. But anyways, it's interesting how when we have these different, I don't know, all the members get pigeonholed in different ways, right? They get characterized in these various stereotypical ways. But one of the things that I find interesting is when all of the members in a fiction have jobs, more often than not, Namjoon and Yoongi get to keep some relation to music while the other members don't. There's just something like interesting about how, and I've thought about this as a writer too, but like how, oh, imagining Yoongi with a different job, like what can we imagine him as if not a musician? And while other members it seems easier to do that for, or it's easier to not see them as passionate about the music aspect of it. I don't know. There's a lot of interesting things going on there. Okay, so even with Namjoon and Yoongi, even if they aren't in music proper, not like music producers or whatever, I've seen them as professors, but they're professors of music or they're professors of something related. Especially Namjoon gets professorized into either he's a music related professor or literature because of his lyrics. There's always that connection, whereas other members go off and become models or like they're completely separated from the musical aspects of themselves, which I just find really fascinating. But it's also a pet peeve of like, how come the other members are seen as not as connected to the music as Namjoon and Yoongi?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting conversation to have around like how people headcanon things about the members and then that
Yeah.
becomes projected onto them, right? So often Jin will get characterized as a model when because the worldwide handsome stereotype, he obviously is a very handsome, beautiful man. But then that often gets projected onto him becoming a model in a fanfics. Which there's nothing bad for being a model, and there's nothing. It's, being a model takes a lot of skill, right? And it is a job, but turning okay, this just goes into a whole thing with how people don't know how to characterize Jin in a lot of fanfics. He gets often defaulted to comedic relief when him just as a person in real life isn't a comedic relief person or character, right? He doesn't comedic relief, he relieves attention in conversation spaces. It's not exactly through comedy all the time. So it's interesting to see how he gets characterized as a model when that isn't truly like a representation of him, the actual person. But that's what the fandom projects onto him.
Yeah. I've seen him as, now that I'm thinking about it, I've seen him a lot as a lawyer too. there's paternalistic things going on there, and the comedic relief is a huge thing with him. And I don't know, it's interesting. Like just thinking about the different ways they get stereotyped into these caricatures.
Yeah, especially with Jin as well. He gets characterized as a cook or a chef a lot.
Yeah.
And he
And
is
the
a good
mom.
cook. Yeah, and a mom. When again, it's like the parentification, especially Namjoon and Jin specifically get
Yeah.
parentified a lot. And because of that, because of that, often when Namjoon are like a couple in fanfics, they're seen as a side couple. And they're also seen as like the advisors in the
Yeah.
fanfic. Or more like the level-headed couple, or like the
Mhm.
couple that like the main character is like one of the Maknae line, and they're like, I don't know what to do. I'm gonna go talk with Namjoon about what to do.
Yeah.
That happens so much in a lot of like Maknae line fanfics. Either it's all three of them, or either combination of the two of something happening, and they go consult Namjoon about it.
Yeah.
But those things are direct results of the fact that Namjoon are parentified. Even
Yeah.
though the age gap between Namjoon and Maknae line is not that big, even between Jin and Maknae line is not that big.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting.
There's also a point here about how Hobie, even though Hobie is also part of Rap Line, and he also is heavily involved in the music, he often is like characterized as a musician in fanfics.
Yes, true.
He often becomes like a fashion designer or a dancer, or he does some other type of passion. And what do you think that happens, Kate?
Why do I think that? It's interesting. I don't know. A lot of this probably stems, and it'd be a lot of this is we have to think the fandom around BTS obviously has been growing and changing over the last decade plus, right? A lot of things have evolved over time, and a lot of these have shifted and changed. And there's a historical precedent here that needs to be considered for whatever that's worth. But anyway, that was a digression. But thinking about how I think partly if you look at the origin stories of Namjoon and Yoongi and Hobie, and how just the actual origin stories of Namjoon and Yoongi being these people who have dedicated, their youth to becoming rappers, and that drive to create music, whereas Hobie has this more of a dancer background where the rapping and the music part came second. I think that plays a big role in it. But I also think it's really interesting how Hobie in particular, and I could speculate as to why this is, probably other people have theories, but Hobie in general gets sidelined a lot. And because it's Yoongi music producer, Namjoon music producer, they're a pair that are working in a music company of some kind. And then Hobie is like the dance instructor. So not even the person doing the dancing on stage, but is the person who's the choreographing or being the trainer. And I think that is a really interesting way of sidelining him as a character. And that's if he gets to be a part of in these fantasies, if he gets to be a part of the music company and all. Oftentimes that's not, he's just off doing something else. I just think that there's like some interesting, and of course all of this, all the other members are off also being other things. They're not necessarily a part of the music parts of these stories. So I think there's just an interesting, the ways in which writers think about how to characterize the members and what level of importance they're attaching the members to real world identities. I think there's just something really interesting there in terms of how people think about the members of BTS and how that plays out in the real world versus these kind of fictionalized spaces.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like a lot of the things that people write about for the BTS members are like projections of like real life things or like fandom stereotypes. But
Yeah.
also, I think specifically with Hobie as well, he gets often sidelined in fanfics because people just don't know how to write him.
So true. They just don't, he's seems to be really hard to pin down as a character, right? There's like a lot of them, especially if yeah, there's a variation, we'll get into this later, but there's a variation in one's ability to write, and the actual writing quality of some of these fics is not as great as others. And so people's ability to actually unpack characters and have full meaningful characters is a whole thing. But I feel like Hobie in particular gets flattened a lot in interesting ways. So like either he'll be this really bubbly, sunshine, happy all the time, cries easily, but like is just so happy all the time and there to be the supportive, cheerful side character, or he's this like dark, brooding, super dominating, super strict teacher vibe. So it'll swing either way. It's a very flat expression of a character, and part of that again is like writing quality and ability to actually give nuanced characters in a story is going to be varied across different fictions. But his character in particular, I think people don't know how to pin down what his character actually is, and so it gets this weird flattening of kind of these caricatures of parts of his real life personality.
Yeah, I think especially this happens with other members too. A lot of their characterizations are just flattenings
Yeah.
of who they actually are, and are just slightly more elevated stereotypes.
Yeah.
And I think Hobie specifically becomes subject to this because the way he presents himself is very bubbly, positive. But then we know as fans that he has, especially when we think about Hope World, Jack in the Box, he's very multifaceted as a person. My fellow Aquarius. Okay. But a lot of times people aren't able to capture that very well. I feel like with, especially, it's like how people, when they write Namju, they parentify him and they make him super serious and wise. When he, number one, he's clumsy. Number two, he talks too fast and then gets ahead of what he's thinking and he loses train of thought. Number three, he's a character who's deeply petty. Like when people write him, they don't write him petty enough. They make him have a lot of moral goodness. When I'm like, okay, a true round character. By the way, we use the term flat and round. They're writing terms of how characters are portrayed in writing. A round character, multifaceted. A flat character is one-dimensional. So when we talk about all these different character aspects, very much I think there's something people could dig deeper here on how Hobie is characterized. There's gonna be like some people who are like solo standy who are gonna be like, people hate Hobie, so they don't characterize him well. No, I just think it's difficult to characterize someone who we know is so multifaceted. All the characters, all the people, all BTS members are multifaceted. Let's be clear, right? But I think Hobie in particular is hard to capture because a lot of people don't fully understand him sometimes.
I just wanted to add that, yeah, I think that when we're talking about BTS's characters here and how they get portrayed in writing, this is not actually a reflection on the members themselves. This is a reflection on someone's ability to write. And if a person is not an experienced enough writer, or if they're not going for a deep, meaningful story read, like they're, say, writing something else that doesn't need anything that deep, then yeah, they're not going to capture those nuances. And I do agree that I think that Hobie and all the members to some extent are just like, because they're real people at the like end of the day, and they have all these different kind of personas and things that they work with and that the writers have to work with. I think that makes all of this really challenging for a writer. And I think that, to me, at least as a writer, that's one of the things I really enjoy about it, is going, okay, which personas am I playing with? What characterizations can I explore? When I'm sitting down and thinking about writing one of the members, I'm like, okay, what aspects are going to be important to the narrative and the story, but also what do I want to explore as somebody who's exploring these different facets of someone's identity? And so there's a lot to work with, but again, if someone is not interested in writing that way, and or they're just not experienced enough as a writer yet, you're going to get these kind of flattenings and these things that don't end up really capturing. They tend to lean into things like stereotypes, and they tend to lean into the tropes because it just makes it easier to write, especially for people who are less experienced.
Yeah, this stereotyping and like the trope writing happens most prominently with Jimin. He often gets characterized as a model, a dancer, or unfortunately, we'll touch on this, but he often gets characterized and then feminized,
Yeah.
where he's like the damsel,
Yeah.
right? And Kate was talking about this of how Jimin often gets characterized as mute in some fanfics.
Yeah. If there's a mute character, 9 times out of 10, it's gonna be Jimin.
And there's something to be said there about the feminization of Jimin. And because he is feminized, then people write him as mute.
Yeah.
Because people, there's a lot of historical stuff here about the silencing of women, the punishment of femininity,
Mm-hmm.
and how like femininity should be caged, it shouldn't be expressed,
Mm-hmm.
it shouldn't be outspoken. I think people often lean into stereotype writing with Jimin because I'll just say this very obviously, Jimin is a very feminine man. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with being a feminine man. But because he presents as a feminine man very openly and very confidently, people don't know how to react to that without stereotyping. Especially people who may not be super ingrained in the queer community or may not have a more nuanced perspective on femininity in men. And because of that, what ends up happening is Jimin gets written really flatly as the damsel, as the helpless character that needs help. And ooh, it's a little upsetting. I feel like a lot of fanfics, even when he is feminized or seen as the damsel, they do it right.
Yeah.
Where he is given his own power in some capacity to express. But a lot of times when I read fanfiction, it's like an ick factor where I read it and I'm just like, ooh, why? Let's not. There's like deeper readings we could talk about here with it's about like agency and autonomy as a character. And often Jimin gets stripped of that autonomy as a character in fanfics. And because of that, he then, results as a damsel. Okay, disclaimer. There is nothing wrong if people think it's sexy to do one thing or another in fanfic, right? If you think to characterize the character in a certain way for the purposes of NSFW content, or even like self-indulgent content, that's perfectly fine. But behind every characterization, there's always social reasons why nothing happens in vacuum. So there's always deeper thinking to be had about why we ended up at this point with how this character was characterized. This is not to like shame anyone or say it's bad if anyone characterizes characters a certain way or does things a certain way. It's just these are observations. And Kate and I are thinking about maybe the deeper meanings behind those.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I will also say that as I think about fanfic in general, and as I think about the works people put up on places like AO3, I want to clarify that these fictions tell a deeper, they're more reflective one of the writer, right? Because rather than thinking about, oh, these are a reflection of what BTS is, they're more of a reflection of the writer, but they're also a reflection of where we are, not only as a fandom, but where we are socially, in the bigger context of thinking about a lot of fan fiction is written by women or queer folk. And you can tell that when you're reading them because a lot of the stories are more relational. They're reflective of issues and things that women find important or queer folk find important. You can see that reflected in the fiction itself. And so a lot of this can be read as like kind of a reflection of where we are as a society, and especially as where we are as a fandom in terms of what we think are important stories to tell, right? And important phenomena and events and relationships. These are the things we're trying to unpack. And there's things to be said about a lot of the fanfic has a romance element, right? A lot of the fanfic has elements of hurt comfort, because this is something that, broadly speaking, not just in army, but these are things that people flocking to these kind of fandoms, they want to read and they're interested in. And so there's things to be said. So like the damsel in distress is like a classic story trope broadly, right? And so bringing that into a BTS fanfic, thinking about, okay, of the members, who makes the most sense to fit in this damsel in distress trope? And we often land with Jimin, because he, again, tends to get characterized fairly easily as the more feminine of the members. We see all the members get damsel in distress across fanfic, but he by and large, we see him get characterized as that a lot, which is interesting.
But yeah, I totally agree with that point. I think across the board, we're like generalizing a lot here when we're talking about fanfic, because there's so much fanfic written, you can find anything.
Literally anything.
When we talk about these fanfics, there's a lot of nuance behind it. It's not just us going, oh, Jimin fanfic has him as damsel being saved. No. No.
No.
Not like that at all. But with talking about Jimin as well, we have to talk about, of course, Taehyung and Jungkook. I kind of want to talk about them together. I feel like often they get paired together, right? Because Taehyung is the biggest ship in the fandom. But also, I think both of them get characterized together very young. Even though the age gap between the members is not very drastic, they get characterized as really young. And Taehyung gets characterized as really cold, and Jungkook gets characterized as really open and like bubbly. When really there's more nuance to both of them in that.
So much more nuance there. Woo!
Specifically with Taehyung, I feel like a lot of fanfics pre Love Yourself era, pre Wings, characterized him as really hyper, because he was really young when he first joined BTS. Right. So the way he presented himself to the world, he was very like, he did the dub smash videos and like all these silly things, and then he mellowed out as he got older, because that happens to like a lot of people, right?
Right.
When you're really young, you're really like, and then as you get older, you like calm down more. Yeah. And I think it's interesting to see the difference in how he's characterized in 2016 fanfiction versus 2024 fanfiction, because it's so different. He is, I think now, often stereotype is very stoic and very dark and brooding. When you actually see live streams with Taehyung, right? And he's very jokey still. And silly. Just like the way he's perceived by the fandom and then projected onto in fanfiction, he gets characterized as this. And then Jungkook very much isn't really the opposite of that, but he gets characterized as really bubbly often. And very the youngest member. He's treated as like child. He gets like infantilized a lot, where he's seen as like the baby of the group, which is true, right? He is the baby of the group. But the way he's treated in fanfiction of that is really interesting, because it's taken to the extreme of that. Yeah. And with Jungkook specifically, I also want to talk about how he often gets main characterized in fanfics. So there's a lot of times, I think like the top 100 BTS fanfics I three. Okay. Often in a lot of big BTS fanfics, Jungkook will be the main character, like the proxy for the audience, the vehicle for the narrative. And I often think this happens because this is gonna ruffle some feathers, but he is like the most popular BTS member. And often with that popularity, he becomes the main character in fanfics. But the way he's written as the main character in fanfics sometimes really grinds my gears, because I'm just like, this is not queer enough for me. like he's written in a way where I'm just like, this is not capturing like the way Jungkook actually, they make him really naive or just really like, how do I describe, really straight
Yeah.
in a way where he's very typical anime shonen protagonist. Jungkook becomes a vehicle for that, in the sense that he becomes the vehicle for let's go explore the world and do all these things, where I'm just like, that's not
Yeah.
Jungkook. That's just a main character. But that's not, this happens a lot of times in fanfiction where people write the fanfic but they don't actually consider the actual characterization of the actual characters or the celebrities or whatever. They just write
Right.
whatever they want. And I think Jungkook often gets defaulted to that in a lot of stories.
That's super interesting. I had not thought about that before, but I think that's like really true, actually. It's funny because some of my favorite fanfics have him as the main character, but in those fanfics, one, the writer is really good, so there's that. But also in those fanfics, I feel like the authors are probably pretty queer themselves because it just reads like that. Like it, I think that's really interesting the way he's like a blank slate for people to use. And not because his BTS persona or his real life persona are blank slates. Just that's just like you said, he's a vehicle, which I think that's really interesting. Cause yeah, I feel like Jimin becomes that a lot too for probably straight white women fanfic authors. Like he also becomes, and I kind of wonder if there's some that comes to that self-indulgence, almost imagining themselves as Jimin, as the author, putting if he's the main character, putting himself in that position.
Yeah, I talk about this with Jungkook quite often because, okay, I'm going to talk about another fandom here right now. Y'all are not going to know what I'm talking about, but there's a point to be made. But in this one fandom called Ruby, RWBY, there's a big fanfic author. By the way, Ruby is like a cartoon anime thing. It was by Rooster Teeth. It was like a big deal on the internet. If you see like anime girls with like gun scythes, that's Ruby, right? And there's this one big fanfic author who would use this one guy character as like the vehicle of narration in a lot of his fanfics. But the way characters are characterized are not like in this show at all. So this is a common phenomenon across multiple fandoms where like a character becomes a vehicle and they don't actually are characterized as them. And in Army, I feel like that happens sometimes. It doesn't happen a ton, I think, as in other fandoms, but it very much does. Because I feel like we could talk about the big three, not the big three, but we could talk about, Kate and I wanted to touch on this, but like the three fanfics we think we really want to touch on in this episode is House of Cards by Sugamins, Ukyo by Charlena, and then the Songbird of the Sea by Maya Archives? Maya?
Yeah.
Specifically in House of Cards, the way Jungkook is characterized there, he is a vehicle for narration, but at the same time does hold a lot of character from the actual celebrity. It's very interesting the way, well, Kate hasn't read House of Cards, so she can't talk about this.
Sorry. It's on my to-do list for when I'm in a better mental place.
Yeah, but the way Jungkook is characterized in House of Cards is really interesting because he's characterized in such a way. Okay, in House of Cards, he's like a gangster leader guy, right? Which is number one, Jungkook in real life, obviously not a gangster. Number two, obviously does not do violence upon others. Number three, he's just a little goober IRL. He's not like that type of person. But the way House of Cards characterizes him, he very much is this dark, brooding vehicle of the narration. And within all these fanfics, dark vehicle of narration, it's interesting to see how Jungkook is characterized with that as well. Especially with Taehyung too. Like Taehyung in House of Cards, he's the main character of House of Cards. But really in House of Cards, it branches out where the main characters become Taehyung, Jungkook, and Jimin. It's not just Taehyung at the end. There's also something to say there about like how Taehyung is a police officer. He's like an undercover cop. Sorry, spoilers. Undercover cop. And how we feel about cops now. But this fanfic was written in 2016, so this is like a little different perspective. So that's just like my 2 cents with that. With House of Cards, there's a lot of violence in the actual fanfic as well. There's like,
I think there's something interesting to be said about all of these top fanfics all have a pretty decent level of violence in them, actually.
Yeah,
Like,
if you want
if we're not talking about like just the gratuitous NSFW porn stuff, then it tends to lean gratuitously violent. I think there's something interesting going on there.
yeah, especially how I feel like in fan fiction, violence becomes like a vehicle of exploration for people, a way to play, again, narrative play, huh? That's what Kate studies. But like all these things become like vehicles of play in
Yeah,
fanfic spaces to explore different psychological things or to work through things for people. Like
right.
I think the House of Cards author, she talked about, I think like her readers told her that like her depiction of drug use in the fanfic helped them recognize their drug use or help them help their people around them with drug use. And I think that's so interesting because I feel like the depiction of drug use in House of Cards is so unique. And the fact is like not glorified.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And the way it's written, I'm just like, okay, this was written by someone who obviously researched drug abuse because or knows about it very intimately because the way it's written in House of Cards is like there's this one moment, the spoilers. This one moment where Taehyung is like taking drugs and Jimin is like you have to be careful. You can't basically like, can't get addicted to this. And it's like, such an emotionally heartbreaking scene because you know that Taehyung grow throughout the story. Taehyung a couple chapters ago would never have done this, but then now he's doing it.
Right.
And it's like that vehicle of exploration of seeing some a character you start with that's so pure going down this path. It's so interesting because it's okay. Some people relate to that. Some people go, "Oh, I want to avoid that." Writing violence is not like quote unquote bad.
No,
FYI.
certainly not. It's interesting too, because I think that writing overt violence is a way of exploring ideas of trauma and stuff that a lot of us might be, especially now in 2024, but that I feel like a lot of folks have experienced, or more like psychological trauma or more subtle trauma that's not necessarily as obvious as, let's say, having a gun in your face. I think that people use that kind of more obvious violence to process and understand and work through less obvious trauma. And so I think that probably goes for readers too, right? Of this is a way to work through some of these things and think about how trauma impacts people and impacts relationships and stuff. And so I think that's one of them, like the things that probably a lot of people, maybe like you said, I study this, so I think about these, like the impacts and what's actually going on psychologically with people when they're reading and writing this stuff. And at least for me, I feel like a lot of this is okay, this is helping me process, this is helping me understand how this is impacting my relationships. And yeah, and then there's also, like, on a completely different note, I think there's also something to be said about societally the way we equate sex and violence. That's an obvious set. Just look at all the media we consume in general, right? Like a lot of times sex and violence go hand in hand, and there's probably a whole thing to unpack there that we don't necessarily need to unpack in this moment. But I think even fan fiction that doesn't have like really explicit sexual content but still has explicit violent content is still falls into that same category of like sexy violence, right? So that's a whole thing.
Yeah, and there's something to say here about specifically Ukyo by Charlena and how that's like the ultimate fantastical violence.
Yeah, like
Like
literally.
in Ukyo, so much is explored. And we could do spoilers, right? Before it going.
Don't spoil the real spoilers. I don't want to ruin this for people if they haven't read.
Okay, fine, I won't. But in Ukyo, there's violence, but there's like a lot of fantasy violence happening. All the characters are like different demons or
Right.
like
It's literal
fantasy. Yeah, literal fantasy, right? There's literally the characters are like different mythological creatures. Ukyo is, in my opinion, is like one of the ultimate explorations of a lot of traumatic things through so much violence. Because it's not only like the layer of violence that you're exploring trauma through, you're exploring it through an even more fantastical lens, so you can explore even more.
Yeah.
Like in both House of Cards and Ukyo, there's also polygamy, which, by the way, okay, I'm someone who I'm just gonna say I'm a monogamous person, but I think people who are who are poly or like exploring poly through fiction is really interesting.
And it happens a lot in BTS fanfic. There's so much poly, so much.
That goes into a whole conversation about found family, but I think we want to finish up this point with violence first.
Yes.
Yeah. Because Ukyo does like all that through a fantastical lens, and then the Songbird in the Sea then does all that exploration just through a fantasy lens. There is violence in Songbird in the Sea, but not as extreme as Ukyo and House of Cards.
Yeah, it's a little tamer for sure.
Way
in general.
way tamer.
In general.
Yeah,
like, in general. Yeah.
Okay, the way Songbird in the Sea explores things. Okay, there's multiple things to acknowledge here. I know some people view the author Songbird in the Sea very problematically because they have done problematic things. But we're talking about Songbird in the Sea as like the work. We acknowledge what the author has done, but the work itself, we talk about that. And when we talk about the Songbird in the Sea and the fantastical lens then uses to explore a lot of different themes around family and identity, like the way, like Jimin's journey throughout the story is so interesting because he literally gets taken out of like his home, to be a completely different person, and then he returns home. Sorry, spoilers.
We should probably put a spoiler alert just at the beginning of this episode.
Beginning of this episode, right? So he returns home. So it's like the story of all this trauma that happens to him, but in the end, he prevails.
Right.
So all these stories through violence, through fantasy, through some type of fantastical lens, there's exploration.
Right.
And that's what fanfiction is for. It's for exploration.
Especially with the longer form fics. We're not talking about the little one shots or whatever, but especially with longer form fics, you've got all the class literature things happening in these spaces, right? You've got the hero's journey, where basically the hero starts out as one person, goes through their whole journey and comes out transformed into somebody else. And the story happens along the way. That's just classic literature structure. And you've got a lot of interesting stuff going on with kind of playing around with, like we were saying, fantastical elements and how that adds a layer of interest, but like a way for folks to explore more like the interpersonal. And I don't know, I just think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. And I think it's interesting, especially if you talk about these kind of top 3 fics. These are the fics that have what the highest hit count, they have the highest comments, they have the highest kudos. They're like the top fics. And they all have these similar, there's a lot of dark elements, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of gray, the morally gray ethics of the characters. Are they good guys? Are they bad guys? They're not really either of those. But you're still rooting for them as a reader. You want them to prevail, even if they're doing some inherently very bad things. I think it's interesting what, as a fandom, what kind of this shows in our values as a fandom, reading this stuff.
We like to explore and experience different things, which is why I think, going back to the found family point, I think things like found family and polygamy exist so prevalently in BTS Army because a lot of people come here for community.
Yeah.
They feel community through BTS, so then when they write about BTS, that is the same thing.
Yeah. And I think there's something interesting. I think with the found family thing specifically, I think there's something interesting there in that it feels like a message or a narrative that BTS themselves endorse and play through, and the way like Big Hit and Hive also emphasize that narrative a bit through content. And then you have the extra layers of things like the BU and all the HYYH stuff, where like that is also feels very found family, right? So like it's a very common thing in general, but I think for BTS and ARMY, it's like a very meaningful like story device, I guess, for everyone. It's just nice. It gives good feels when everybody's happy together at the end.
Yeah, it does. Which is why I think things like Alpha, Beta, Omega, like Omegaverse, is so popular in
Mhm.
BTS too. Because people like that innate you found your person or you found your people.
Yeah.
And people write about that so much in ARMY because that a lot of times people describe like when they're in ARMY, maybe not right now. Maybe not right now. But like when they're in ARMY, they found their people, right?
In your ARMY subset, shall we say. Shall we
Yeah, and
emphasize
your
your
ARMY subs
sub-community of ARMY?
yours and I think it's really beautiful that found family works so well in BTS spaces. It makes me really happy. I think it's really cute.
Yeah. Have I written found family? Yes, I have. Yes, I have. I'll admit it. Have I also played into half these tropes we just talked about? Yes, I have. It's fine.
Yeah. I think I think if you've been writing fanfiction for a long time, there's a lot of like exploration and like writing of different tropes you've probably participated in. And with talking about that, we also wanted to talk about like fantasy.
Yes.
Oh, you specifically were talking about how one of your friends had like an interesting comment about BTS fanfiction.
Yeah, so I have a friend who has read lots and lots of different kinds of fanfic, like across multiple different kinds of fandoms. And their comment was basically, it's interesting that BTS fanfic in particular has a lot of fantastical fantasy, a lot of fairy and fae elements to it, a lot of magic and magic realism, like a lot of that. It's a lot more prevalent in BTS spaces than you would find just like anywhere else. Literally, what the of the three top fanfics we just talked about, two of them have like fantastical fantasy magic elements to them. You go.
I think it's interesting that your friend pointed this out because I have no data to back this up, but I feel like a lot of people from a lot of different fandoms funnel into ARMY. A lot of people become ARMYs who
Yeah.
have been in other fandoms. So they have a lot of fanfic writing experience. So what happens is those people write fanfics. And then in turn, what happens is that a lot of ARMY fantasy writing becomes based off of those fanfics or
Mm-hmm.
based off of what they see around the space when it comes to fantasy. Because a lot of fantasy writing outside of ARMY, I think, is inspired by a lot more traditional fantasy fiction. Lord of the Rings is a big one, right? So when people think of traditional fantasy, they think the medieval castle and the elves doing the arrows and stuff. That's what they think, right? But ARMY is exploring a lot more because a lot of the ways they're looking at fantasy is very subversive already. Right, when we talked about
Yeah.
Ukyo literally is like a gangster AU plus a fantasy AU combined
Yeah.
into then talk about crime and everything around it. There's so much going on in that one fanfic. And the only reason Ukyo can exist is because of like all the things surrounding BTS ARMY.
And I think there's something interesting about the fact that with BTS, because they themselves are not actually a genre beyond K-pop idol, right? That it's really easy to just pick them up and put them in any AU. Like you can put them anywhere. And I think there's something interesting, like you're right, about like people coming from other fandom spaces or having come from other literary spaces and go, oh, BTS could fit in my Vampire the Masquerade Dark Club AU. Sure, they could go there and do that. I think that there's an interesting thing about them kind of being able to be transported to all these different spaces. There's just something interesting about the like BTS as Faye and bringing in a lot of those kind of literary spaces in particular seems to be There's a lot of like cool witch AU ones, and even the ones that seem more urban and modern, there's a lot of magic realism that kind of sneaks in, and I think that's really cool and interesting.
Yeah. I think there's also something to say, like the reason Army is capable of writing these types of fanfics in the first place is because many of the fanfic authors writing them are experienced authors.
There are so many fanfics that are so good. So good.
Yeah, and that's because these people have come from other fandoms and have honed their experience in writing, and then now they share it with BTS Army in particular. We were talking about this like before we started recording too, but like overall, the quality of BTS fanfic is really good.
It's so good. I cannot emphasize this enough. There are so many fics on AO3 specifically that are just, they're up there for you to read for free. So much better written than like stuff you could pick up in paperback, right? Like it's just for free. It's just up there for free for people to read. And it's so good. Like I can't emphasize this enough. There's just so many good writers out there. And I love how many fanfic writers are like, oh, this is my first time writing fan fiction, or oh, English is my second language. And then you just read it and you're just like, I'm sorry, you just wrote something that's better than I could ever hope to write. It's just, there's just so much good stuff up there. And it's just, I don't know, I feel like if you are an Army and you're not engaging in the fanfic space, you are definitely missing out on some really cool stuff.
I definitely agree with that. I think Army, you talk about second language stuff, right? And like, this is my first fanfic ever. And I think when it comes to those types of instances, those people have not a lot of the culture in the fanfic culture influencing them already. Because like, for a long time, when I read coffee shop AUs in a lot of different fandoms, it's like the most boring, bland thing in the world. And it's not good.
Yeah.
But BTS Army, I think because we have a lot of fans who are like, their second language is English. Like a lot of times when people who their first language isn't English, they think of the language differently. And the way they like portray things is like different, but so well received and welcomed. It's so fresh, right?
Yeah.
And in addition to that, there's like people who have never written fan fiction a lot before, but they have writing experience in some capacity. So the way they portray things is way different, but again, very welcomed. So I love Army as like a fanfic writing community, even though it's problematic and there's some things that are wrong fit, blah, blah, nuance, whatever. But overall, I really love BTS fanfiction. I feel like the people who come to write in this space are so good at it. And I love reading good stuff. I'm not gonna lie. Not gonna lie.
I enjoy trash as well as the next person, but also there's just some really good literature happening in these spaces. It's just been a wonderful space to find community, right? As somebody who writes and actually has readers that interacts with me and stuff, I find there's always going to be problematic people, and there's always going to be, again, insert nuance here, but I feel like there are so many supportive people who are just like eager to read and eager to engage, and sometimes that's nice to get a break from whatever drama is happening on Twitter and just engage with the actual fandom and being a fan.
Yeah. I think in the truest capacity, fan fiction is like very strong, closely knit community once you find your people in it. And very much it is, this is gonna be a controversial point, but I think the fan fiction writing community in BTS Army might be the truest representation of what an army actually is. Beyond funding, streaming, buying.
That's a spicy take, but I like it.
Yeah. So instead of buying things and consuming things, you create in the inspiration of BTS.
Yeah,
Isn't that beautiful?
it is beautiful. And
Yeah.
there's some really beautiful things happening in this world. It's nice.
And with that, we must close. I was gonna suggest for final thoughts we give a fanfic rec.
All right. Not seen by the viewers was the 20 minutes I spent trying to find a fanfic rec. Okay, but so this is a recommendation. And the caveat being that I have many where this came from. This is just one I picked randomly. Anyway, Trust in the Weather by Melodious Bee. And it's really nice because it touches on a lot of the stuff we talked about in this episode with kind of it's a witch AU. So it's their weather witches and it's a whole thing. And it's really well done. I'll leave it at that.
Much love to that.
Yes.
We love fan fiction here. For me, this is the fanfic. This is my favorite. So I give it to the people as my favorite. This is More Walls Collected Along the Way by Anna Pinecone Pickers on AO3. It is a Namjoon fanfic. Basically what happens is it's set in the future kind of where like gay marriage is legalized in Korea. And Jin and Namjoon, they're the main couple. They broke up like years ago. But then randomly it turns out that they're still married technically because they got married in America.
Oh.
Before they broke up. So Jin has to go find Namjoon to divorce him, basically.
Nice.
But then they end up along the way figuring out maybe we do still love each other. And I think it's a really cute story. It also, I think, touches on a lot of like when characterizing BTS characters, I think this is peak. I think Anna understands the character so fundamentally that she like the way she characterizes them is so this is the peak of the characterization that can happen. They're so complex as characters. They go through so many different things as characters. And I'm just like, yes, I get it. I understand that. So if you want to read it, go ahead and read it. It's very iconic. And overall, any last thoughts about fanfiction to leave the viewers with, Kate?
I highly recommend reading with it, engaging with that part of the fandom if you haven't yet. And I think there's a lot of really interesting, fun, playful, cathartic, lovely things happening in that space. And it's so funny to me because I feel like, especially as I get to know mutuals on Twitter or wherever, and we're army and we touch base with each other, and then all of a sudden, hey, and you read fanfic? And then all of a sudden everybody is like giving their recommendations, and it turns out everyone's reading fan. It's just like this fun little this nudge wink until everybody realizes, oh no, we're all reading fanfic here and we all have recommendations to give. And I just think it's like this really lovely way to connect with people. And I think that understanding the stories that other people are engaging with is a really nice way to get to know them and to get to understand them as people. And I don't know, I just think it's a really lovely part of the fandom that doesn't get talked out loud a lot about, except for explicitly in the fanfic spaces.
Yeah, I really much agree with that. I think the fanfiction community has managed to be a little detached from overall. That's because a lot of people hate the fanfic community. Let's be real here. But they're able to be a little more detached. And I think that's really nice because right now we're seeing on Army Twitter, it's very interesting. It's like the deterioration, yet the rebuilding of the community constantly, especially around Palestine right now. And I think having the fanfic community as like an outlet, as a space where I feel much safer is really important to me. Because the people who are like Zionists and Zionist compliant, a lot of them don't participate in fanfiction at all because they're like, ew, that's weird. Or they're like, you're dehumanizing the BTS members, and then they protect sexual assaulters anyway. Yeah, but very much the fanfiction community is there. If you want to participate, go ahead. And like any community, there's problems, of course. There's nuances to it. But I love fanfiction. I've been writing fanfiction for like over a decade now. And I appreciate all the people I've met along the way. And with that, we leave you with some fanfiction recommendations and a lot of thoughts about fanfiction, about BTS, about identity, about projection.
Yeah. And I think this won't be the end of our fanfiction discussions. We have more on this. We couldn't all fit it into one episode.
Yeah, we could talk about this for a long time because there's a lot to dissect.
We do.
Each individual topic we talked about here today could have been their own whole hour-long episode.
Yeah, basically. And then there's even more. Yeah, there's even more that we didn't even touch upon yet. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. There might be an ABO episode. Ooh.
Ooh.
Omegaverse. I was an original defender. Anyway, thank you all so much for listening to this episode. Take care of yourselves. Protect yourselves.
Yes.
Go write fan fiction and read fan fiction.
Yes.
And as always, free Palestine. We will get through this. Go read the Paste magazine article that has Kate in it, by the way. The one. Hold on. We'll put the link in the description. Yeah. But let's read Kate's excerpt right now, actually. Okay, go read the article by Paste magazine. It's As the Genocide in Gaza Continues, Palestinian K-pop fans organize for their people. It's by Katie Burt. It was just published, not today. It's going to be next week for you guys. Last week for you guys when you listen to this episode. But you should go read it. It's great. It interviews Deja, who is one of the main organizers for Army for Palestine. Also features Kate in it. Kate has a whole part that she talks about in it. I will, in my best Kate impersonation, I will say this. For Kate Ringland, an assistant professor in the computational media department at UC Santa Cruz. Oh my god, that's where I go. Who does research on BTS fandom? The weaponization of fan as identity is to be as proven real or not has become cyclical on Twitter. It seems to be a thing that comes up over and over again and never gets resolved, says Ringland. Because, of course, army means whatever it means to the person who's claiming to be an army, right? It's an identity thing. You can't tell someone else that they're an army or not, but these activities are in gatekeeping and policing who's in, who's out. They're activities that people have been engaging in for as long as I've been on Twitter. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, Professor Ringland. She really... So go read the article. There's a ton of other great excerpts in here from Deja, from the author herself, Katie, talking about and giving context to the boycott and to the efforts of armies. So very much go read that. That's your reading assigned. Okay, that's all I got. Have a good day, guys. Bye.
Bye.